Hi there, you're watching Bourbon Battles. My name's Joe. Hey, hopefully this isn't your first time here, but if it is, welcome. Love to have you. So today we're going to talk about 5 bourbons or 5 whiskeys that I would actually pay secondary prices for, so stick with us. That's right. So if you watch me very much, you know I'm not big on the secondary market. Sip it, don't flip it, and all that stuff. I don't think I've ever sold a bottle of whiskey. I've traded some. So let's get into what the rules behind this are. These are not in order, and this is not a top 5. This is just 5 whiskeys that I would pay secondary prices for. And I came up with these values by going to secondary pages on Facebook and getting a good gauge. So let me know if I'm way off or it's more or less where you're at. Some of these might not be unicorn allocated whiskeys that you even have to pay secondary prices for where you're at. I'm in Indiana, and this is how it worked out for me. So the rules are these must have a secondary value, which means they actually sell on secondary value. And it cannot be readily available on shelves, right? So I don't know what would go for more that's readily available on shelves, but nothing that I've got over here I could walk into a store and just assume that they have. And the value that I would be willing to pay has to be the true secondary. I can't say, oh, I'd pay extra for George T. Stagg. I'd pay $300 for that. Of course I would. I'd pay $500 for Pappy Van Winkle 25-year, right? That's not what they're going for on secondary. So I tried to come up with a true secondary value. You want to know what's in my glass? Stick to the end. It might shock you. Okay, so here we go. The first one I want to talk about is, and if you watch me very much, you know that I love this stuff, Booker's. We can leave it like this, or we can turn it, right? This just happens to be the last batch of 2023, the Storyteller batch. It actually won the Booker's tournament I did, where I tried all 4 Bookers from 2024. This came out on top. So Booker's, right? You either love it or you hate it, right? It's that traditional Jim Beam profile, nutty. This is hot, right? It drinks hot. These usually range from 121 to 130 proof. They're 6 to 8 years old. They're blends. They're not single barrels. You don't see these very often, at least in Indiana. And as far as presentation goes, I don't think it gets a whole lot better than that. I particularly love Booker's. If you've not had it and you're wanting to know if it's worth pulling the pin on, surely you know somebody that's got some you can try. There are batches that are a lot better than others, so be cognizant of that. I've got one that's from, I want to say like 2018, 19, 20, somewhere in there, and I just do not like it at all. So, don't try one and rule it out, right? Go back and watch my videos where we talked about some of these things and say, okay, here's the best one. I can find it at retail or secondary value, which I'm getting ready to tell you what it is on this one. And I'd start with that one of the top 2, right? So retail on this bad boy now is right around $99. Some places will tell you $89. Secondary value, this is what's so cool about Booker's, is $100 to $125. So if retail is $100, I see them a lot for like $110 in Indiana. Well, tax is 8%, so you can literally get it for like $2 more than retail on secondary. Usually it's got to be out for a little while before people will go to that extreme, right? But you can find these $100 to $110, $120, very regular. You can't go back 5 years ago and find them for that, right? Those are going for much more. But recent, like this year's expressions, still pretty new. What a great value for secondary. I don't even try to find them on the shelf anymore. It's just too easy to find somebody that's got one for $100, $110. So if you like Booker's, that's a great one. Next thing I want to talk about is 1792 Foolproof. This one particular one happens to be a store pick from West Clay Wine and Spirits in Indianapolis. This was a good bottle. Made at the 1792 Barton Distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky. Used to be open to visitors. I believe they've closed it to visitors, which is unfortunate. Same people that bring you 1792 small batch, foolproof, single barrel, age 12-year-old. We've actually done the foolproof and the 12-year-old here lately in battles. Great stuff. They do a ton of contract distillation. This is the stuff you're going to see at Walmart under different brands, Sam's Club, Costco is the big one, right? They're all over the place. You go down to Florida, the ABC stores have 1792 distillate. So these are 125 proof, which is a barrel entry proof. And if you don't know what the barrel entry proof is, that's what the liquor goes into the new charred white oak barrel. It goes in at 125 proof. So now, when they're done, and this happens to be 8.5 years old. In 8.5 years, it's not 125 proof anymore. It's probably much, much higher. But what they do is they proof it back down by adding water to that 125 proof, so they match it, right? Maker's Mark, just last year's release was BEP, barrel entry proof. So it's a really cool way to do it. This stuff retails for $60, and I was very surprised to find that right now in the Indianapolis area, a lot of times you'll see it for like 2 bottles of this, a store pick and a regular, or however these guys are doing it, for $100 for a pair, under retail. Can't beat that. But usually $60 to $75. So you're seeing it on secondary markets for right at retail. This stuff's hard to find. I have bought it on a shelf before. I own several bottles of this, mostly store picks. But if you don't see one of these, no worries. Find it on secondary for about the price of retail, maybe a couple bucks more. Great deal. So before we go to the next one, I want to talk to you about the Staven Thief Society real quick. You see their website there. They have basically educate you in bourbon history. So check it out. They've got a couple different courses. The Executive Bourbon Steward course is what I took. And with discount code BBB15, stands for Bourbon Battles 15, you get 15% off of that course. Highly, highly recommended. So let's go to the next one here that I talk about. These are almost always store picked, if not always. Four Roses, single barrel strength. This particular one is 108.4 proof. They're all in that 110-ish range. So there's 2 different places. They make this at the distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. Don't be confused with Lawrenceburg, Indiana. 10 different recipes of this stuff here. If you haven't had it, I believe if you go to the distillery or the bottling plant that's in Cox's Creek, just south of Louisville, you can buy these kits, and they're not super cheap, but it's like 10 2-ounce bottles of every recipe that they make. So once you find what your favorite recipe is, then you can go out and start hunting that particular recipe. My favorite recipe is OESO. I love it. I don't know that there's one that I dislike. And I don't know that I've had them all, but I love the OESO. In fact, that's what I'm drinking now. I said I was going to wait to the end, but I'm not because I'm almost out. So I'm going to get a little freshen up. I get like these cherry cola notes in this, and I always have. People that have tried it have said I'm absolutely crazy. Let me know if you get cherry cola notes in like an OESO. Let me know in the comments what you think about this, right? And speaking of the comments, one of the best things you can do is like, comment, share, and all that stuff. So let me know in the comments what you think. What are some whiskeys that you would pay secondary for? Not you'd pay more than retail, but what would you pay for that it's actually going for? So this is 8 to 12 years old. The Four Roses barrel strength. 110 proof, like we said, 10 recipes, MSRP $79.99. What's great about this, depending on where you live, you can head down to Cox's Creek. I want to say let's just say 30 minutes south of Louisville. And I think they put this out every day in some fashion, some recipe. I don't know how often you can buy it, right? Most distillers will scan your ID and say you can only buy 1 bottle of E.H. Taylor a year, right? So let me know if you know anything about that in the comments. I'd be real curious. Share that with everybody. But you see these, right? These are so dependent on the recipe, right? Anywhere from $100 to $150. I do believe the OESO is a more popular one, so it gets up close to that $140, $150 range. $80 retail, unless you can buzz down there real easy. I say go for it. $140 for an OESO or whatever your favorite recipe is. It is so good. I go back and forth. People ask me all the time, what's your absolute favorite bourbon? And there's several things I say, right? I've got, right now, I'd probably tell you it's a Maker's Mark Private Select that I happen to have. That particular one, it's a store pick, right? It's so good. It might possibly be my favorite bourbon that I own right now. Sometimes I'll say this. Sometimes I'll say Parker's Heritage Orange Curacao, which most people hate, which I think is funny. I love it. So if you got some of that and you hate it, let me know. I'd like to have it. So yeah, sometimes this is what I talk about. So keep that in mind. Highly recommend. You can find those little 10-pack recipe samplers on secondary markets pretty easy too. You have to look in to see what retail is and if it's worth it, but then you can start to dial it in and figure out what your favorite recipes are. That way, when you go out and look for them, hey, maybe your favorite recipe is one of the ones that goes for $100. Great deal. So check out Four Roses Barrel Strength. Love that stuff. Okay, moving right along. Hey, keep in mind this stuff right here. Look, boom, private preserve. If you get that expensive whiskey like that, you paid over $100 for it. This stuff will make it last a lot longer. You use it just like you do in wine. So next is one of my favorite whiskeys, really, Weller Antique 107. Buffalo Trace Distillery, you guys all know about that. It's a wheated bourbon. It's got the same mash bill as the new Pappy. All the Wellers, the same mash bill. I could have easily been drinking that and said that was my favorite on the list. It's 6 to 8 years old. Here's the kicker. Retails for $59.99. If you can find this for retail, and a lot of people in Ohio say they can, it's one of the best values in all of bourbon. They did go to a cork. It used to be a screw off. At retail, it's a no-brainer. Buy it by the case. Secondary markets, it's very consistent in Indiana. It's $100. You can always buy one for $100. And I say, no problem. Buy it for $100, right? No ifs, ands, or buts. If you don't have one of these, check it out for yourself. It is absolutely, there's a piece of cork floating around in there. It is absolutely one of my favorite whiskeys, one of the whiskeys that really got me into loving whiskey, right? Now, I don't think it's the best wheated bourbon, but it is one of my favorite, right? There's certain maker's marks I'll take over that all day, every day. So we're coming down to our last one. Before we do, I want to invite you to visit bourbonbattlesblind.com, where you'll find links to all of our social media, including Patreon. Check that out. And before we go, I said these weren't in order, but number one is number one. It's the number one whiskey I think you should pay extra for. Before we do, I've got an alternate, and there's a little bit to it, and we'll just briefly hit it. Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Proof. Again, one of my favorite whiskeys in the world. These are very high proof. They get up into that 130 proof range. They are very reasonably priced. They're not overly difficult to find in Indiana. That's why I didn't make the list. I think they retail in the $60-some range. And a lot of times you'll see them on secondary pages right now for about $75. So for an extra $10, whatever, if this is something you can't find easily where you live, $75, right? You know, a little bit more than retail. I'd say even if you just absolutely cannot find it, I'd go up to $100 in that bottle. I blinded this against George T. Stagg 2022. The George T. Stagg won for me. Chad picked the Jack Daniels, but it was by the thinnest of margins. I think on any given day I could swap. I'd take this over Stagg Jr. or Stagg anytime. And for the money, it's just nearly impossible to beat. If you go out and hunt around for it a little bit, you will find a Jack Daniel's Single Barrel Proof. That's a mouthful. So what's the number one whiskey that I think every whiskey lover should pay secondary pricing for if they can't find it? So this is funny, right? If you watch this very much, you might be a little surprised about this. I'm going to give you some of the stats before I pull it out. Perfect timing. I can taste a little bit of it. It's 93 proof. It's low proof. What you'll notice is pretty much everything down there was higher proof. Antique 107 was the lowest. This is 93 proof. It's 6 to 8 years old. It's a single barrel, which means one barrel, and they bottle it up. It retails for $56.99. You can routinely find it for $100 to $120. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's Blanton's Horsies. So it is one of the most sought after whiskeys in all of the world. I can remember when I first started getting into this, I was as guilty as anybody else. I'd go in a liquor store. Do you have any Blantons, right? Can't tell you how many times I've heard that. I hear it at Total Wine probably half the time I go. It's good bourbon. I say this, and I can't remember who I heard say this first, but I've heard this said many times, and I'll reiterate it. If you don't like Blantons, you don't like bourbon. It's that simple. It's traditional. You know, unless you're a cowboy and you got to have high proof stuff, which I'm not. I do prefer high proof stuff. But what is so amazing about this stuff, in my opinion, first of all, it's so difficult to find. So you spend that extra 40 or 50 bucks, get you a bottle. It's iconic on your shelf. Somebody comes over, they're going to recognize it. If they're just getting into whiskey, they might say, oh my gosh, I got to try that, right? My dad had a bottle of this growing up, and we turned 21. It was a real treat to get to taste this stuff. So what I love about it is you can take it and you can truly blind it. And if you don't know what I'm talking about by blind, go back and watch some of our other episodes. Our most popular episode we've ever done is Blanton's versus Evan Williams Bottled and Bond Blind, where Chad and I both picked Blanton's. Elijah Craig, small batches, beating it. Michter's, one of the Michters, I don't know the nomenclature between all of them, has beaten it. Blind it with Jim Beam single barrel, if you can find that easily. Russell's Reserve 1792 small batch, a lot of times will beat it. Knob Creek. That's what's so cool to have about it. Your friends that love whiskey can come over. It does have that traditional Buffalo Trace, right? We don't talk about tasting notes, but I do get that grape, right? Blind it with your friends. And if you don't know why we drink whiskey blind, guys, it's because we don't give a rat's ass what's on the label. We just like good whiskey. So there, check this out, guys. There's 5 with an alternate whiskeys that I say is A-OK to pay a little bit extra for secondary pricing on. So tell me what you think. What's your favorite whiskey that you'll pay secondary prices for? Do you have one? Do you refuse to do it? Are you retail only? Because that's okay too. You know, hey, I'm Joe. This is Bourbon Battles. And remind you, don't be a whiskey wise ass. Don't be a bourbon butthole. Flip, sip it. Don't flip it. Do all that stuff, right? But whatever you do, don't drink and drive. See you next time.
If you drink, don't drive to the watermelon crawl.